Well, welcome and hello to everybody. This is John Mullins from Themis, and thank you for joining our webinar today. We'll get started here in just one moment. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us for our topic today. So we're going to jump right in. I know you got some things going on. All right, again, my name is John Mullins. I'm from Themis. Today's topic, we're looking at an Oracle 12c Release 2 feature, and this is an improvement to the index usage tracking mechanism. So we've had that in the past, and we'll talk about that just briefly here in a little bit, but we'll see how it's also been improved here in just a bit. Just a few things as we get started here. You can see my email address there on the screen, jmullins@themisinc.com. So if you have any questions, it's best to send questions to that email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, probably later today if you have any questions regarding today's feature. And we do have a short time period for today's webinar, so it's hard to get to questions in that time frame there. So if you can have any questions, hold off on those, send them to that email address, that would be great. Also, just the Themis website, themisinc.com. On there, you'll also see a tab at the top there for webinars, so you can see a list of past webinars. So in case this might be your first one that you're attending, we've had a lot of webinars in the past, whether they have to do with Oracle, all different types of topics there, or DB2, or CICS, or Java, lots of different webinars out there that you can take advantage of, and those are free. You can also follow us on Twitter. All right, let's jump right in here. So we're looking at the new and improved index tracking feature. Just a little bit as we get started here, if you haven't attended any of my webinars before or any of my classes, I'm seeing a list of attendees there. I see a number of people that have been in my classes in the past, and it's good to see you there again today. But I've been working with Oracle since the early 80s. Started off with Oracle version 5. Didn't have a whole lot of features in version 5, but it was a good product as far as storing data, retrieving data, those types of things. I am an Oracle certified professional DBA and also a certified technical trainer, and if you've been in my classes, you know that I've also taught a number of classes over the years. Most of those Oracle type related, but some were DB2 or SQL Server or Linux as well. And I'm working with Themis, and if you may have taken some other classes from Themis as well, not only just Oracle, but as you can see a list, kind of a short list there of some of the other courses. You can see a list of all the courses out there at themisinc.com, and Themis has been around for a long time offering great training for everybody there. All right, today's topic, there's a few classes or courses that are kind of related to our topic today. So obviously today being 12c Release 2, our new features types of classes for developers and administrators would carry such a topic in there along with a lot of other topics, along with our SQL optimization or tuning class would have some information in there about indexes and index monitoring and such there. So you can get more detail, more information, hands-on laboratories, things like that if these other related type of classes that are out there. All right, topic at hand here today. So what we want to take a look at is the 12c Release 2 improvement to the index usage tracking feature, and we want to see what the different options are, how to set it up, how to use it, how to look at reports from it. So we'll take a look at all those different capabilities there and see how that might help us compared to the old way that it used to do it. And many of you are already aware of why we'd want to track index usage out there. You know, whether our indexes are being used or not. So, you know, when we submit a SQL query to run, the optimizer is going to come up with an execution plan for it if there's not already an execution plan in place. And comes up with that execution plan, stores it in memory in the shared pool memory structure on the database server. Okay, once that execution plan is in place, whether we have queries that are using the indexes or not, if the index is there, it's a physical thing, it takes up space, it has to be maintained whether our queries are using those indexes or not. So if we do have other pieces of code that are doing things like inserts, updates, deletes, or we're generating statistics for tables and or indexes that are out there, those indexes have to be updated. And so, that's a piece of overhead really that's out there. And depending on the how intense our SQL might be, for example, are we inserting 4 million records, or are we inserting 4 records? The volume of data that's involved there could cause that to be quite a bit of overhead there. So typically when we're monitoring index usage, it's not something that we're wanting to do all the time. And in the past, prior to Oracle 12c Release 2, we had an option to turn it on and off, but you'll see that's a little bit different in 12c here. So that index maintenance can cause a lot of extra CPU, a lot of I/O usage, whether the index is being used or not. So if the index isn't being used, or is used not very frequently, maybe only for some quarterly type of things or things like that, or weekly, then maybe we want to, drop those indexes until they're actually needed. For other indexes that are used all the time, we're not going to do something like that. So we need some sort of way to identify, what is our index usage like? How are indexes being accessed? How many times are they being accessed? Which isn't something we had automatically from Oracle in the past, but we're going to see that we can do something like that here today. So prior to Oracle 12c Release 2, if we wanted to monitor our indexes, we did it with an alter index command was one way to do that. So we said alter index, whatever the index name is, and then we said monitoring usage. That would turn it on. And then we had a view, a dynamic performance view. I'm going to call it a view. It's really a synonym to a view, called $object usage. And within that particular view, there was a column there that would say, okay, is monitoring on this particular index, is it turned on or off, yes or no? And has the index been used, yes or no, since monitoring was turned on? So this is something, and you can still do this in 12c, although you see there at the bottom of the screen that it has been deprecated. So in the past, we could always turn on or enable or disable index monitoring or tracking of those indexes, whether they're being used or not. That particular feature in the past did not tell us how many times the index was actually accessed or used. It just said yes or no. And I talk a lot about that in classes on previous versions of Oracle, that sometimes what we would do is we would create a script or such. It'd be a batch job. It would run every so often. Go out there and check this particular view, looking for particular indexes. If they're marked as yes, in that particular program, there was a counter, and those counts were kept in a program table that you've created yourself, and then we reset it back to no, and then just keep doing that over and over to get our own count if that's something that we wanted. Otherwise, we're just going to rely on the yes or no, because yes means that it was accessed one time or a million times. It doesn't tell us which it was. It just says yes or no. So index monitoring in the past was an option that you can turn on and then turn back off. You may also realize, maybe not, that in the past also, and this hasn't changed, but we also had table monitoring. Monitoring inserts, updates, deletes, truncates on tables in the past. And a few versions ago in Oracle, that was made an automatic feature. So when you created your database, the table monitoring was automatically turned on for you. And Oracle used that table monitoring so that it could identify things such as stale statistics, for example, things like that. So that was automatic prior to 12c. The table monitoring was. The index monitoring was optional. Okay, how did that change in 12c? Well, the The index monitoring in 12c is an automatic thing also, just like the table monitoring. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. So that's one change. So the one change is it isn't turned off by default. It's turned on by default, but it's turned on with some particular options to keep the overhead particularly low, for one thing. Another big difference between the index monitoring prior to 12c up to the 12c release 2 was that in earlier versions, that if I turned on the index monitoring, it kept track of whether that index was accessed or not, the yes or no part, at parse time. Okay, not at execution time. That's why you got just the yes or no. So if you submitted a query to run, it got an execution plan. Let's say the execution plan was not already in memory, so it had to come up with a hard parse, come up with a new execution plan that maybe said, hey, yes, I'm going to use an index here, and it would store that in the shared pool memory structure on the database server, and then that would change the used column in the $$ object usage to yes at that point. So it was at parse time. Every time after that, for those queries that were using that same execution plan, that same type of query, it didn't increment a counter because it just needed a yes or no, because it already had been parsed. So it's parsed, the execution plan's in memory. If we rerun that query, yes, at execution time, he's going to use that index that was in that execution plan, but there was no new parse based on it, so that's why there's no count for it. That's changed in the 12c release 2. Now we're going to get a count because at 12c release 2, he's not counting the index accesses at parse time. They're counting the index accesses at execution time. And that's a pretty big deal. It's pretty simple, as you'll see here. All right, so here's the specifics on the 12c release 2 improvement here on the index usage tracking. There's a undocumented parameter, and we know that because it has that underscore on the front of it, but that's the only thing we can do to change a particular option or particular type that has to do with this tracking feature that we're looking at here. So we'll talk more about that parameter here in just a few moments. The valid values that it can have are all or sampled. Sampled is the default. All right, let's talk about that for a moment, even though we'll talk about the parameter in just a little bit as well. Sample just means out of all the SQL that's running, and some of them are using indexes and some of them are not. Maybe they're all using indexes, who knows? But only a sampling of those queries are going to be included in the count. That's meant to keep the overhead down, but it is also going to give you, if you're looking for specific numbers on how many times indexes are being used, you're not going to get that. So, or likely not to get that. So you're going to have some inaccuracies there. If it shows that this particular index was accessed 20 times in the last 15 minutes or just throughout the course of a day, it may have been accessed a lot more than that. It may have been accessed exactly that. Maybe your samples came out, you got lucky on those, right? Or maybe somewhere in between. So sampled is the default. That's what that parameter is set to. That means that index usage tracking is turned on by default. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. Is there a way for us to turn it off? Some of Oracle's other features, yes, you can turn things on, you can turn things off. Some other features you can't. This happens to be one of those that you cannot, as far as I'm aware. And I've contacted Oracle and I've talked with some people there about that as well. And there's a couple of things that we'll mention here in a few minutes that we don't have the capability of doing. So index usage tracking is turned on by default at the sampled level. All right. What we'll need to know is as sampling is happening, it's happening in memory. And you'll see that here on a slide coming up. And the data that's in the memory, as far as the index usage tracking, it gets flushed out to these internal tables that we can access with some views every 15 minutes. And I'll talk about more about that on the next slide. How we can check some of the results of that index usage tracking. We have two different views here. The $$ index usage info view, so a dynamic performance view or synonym there. It's not going to be object specific, so it's only going to show us information about our index usage. Here's the key part. Since the last flush, okay, remember the flush is happening every 15 minutes. So when the data gets flushed back down to disk, so we can access it through these views from their internal tables, the information from this view gets reset. So it just shows us information from the last flush. The DBA index usage view is object specific, so we'll be able to see it index by index. And here's the key part here. It contains, or we'll be able to see through it, cumulative statistics for each index. So after information gets flushed every 15 minutes down, for those individual specific indexes that were accessed during that 15-minute time period, it will update the cumulative statistics for it. And I'll show you some queries here in just a moment on what that looks like there. Those index statistics from this particular view, they stick around as long as the index is still there. The only way that you can reset those is to drop the index and recreate it. There might be some other ways, but that's one way to do it for sure. All right, so we have a new parameter. We have two new views that we can look at here. So let's take a look at some more specific things, and then we'll look at an example here. So here's the part I was talking about. It's tracked in memory, and it's flushed every 15 minutes. Now, I'm not aware of, and again, I've gone back to Oracle on this as well. I'm not aware of a way to manually flush those statistics or that index usage tracking statistics down sooner than 15 minutes. Some of the other Oracle features, like I mentioned, they have that capability where you can, there's like a flush program or store procedure within a supply package. I haven't seen one yet for this. That doesn't mean there's not one. There might be one. I've looked a lot though, and I haven't found one yet. And a lot of the other, if you Google it out there on the internet, some other people have some blogs or such on this particular topic. I haven't seen anybody run across that feature. So that, I guess that would be a negative part of this new feature, is if you're trying to track it and you want to see stuff, right away, you're going to have to wait, 15 minutes to see those results. I guess that's not too long, right? So it goes to memory. It's going to memory for what reason? To keep the overhead to a minimal, right? If we were writing directly to the tables and such, the overhead would be higher there. So we're going to send it to memory, then flush it down, and then we can query our views to see what's going on there. As far as when we do this type of thing, here's a pretty common sense type of thing, right? We want to do this during a time frame that's a good representation of what we're trying to track. We're not going to run it at 3 in the morning for some stuff that should run against certain tables using certain indexes when they're not likely to run. You guys know that. So just a little bit of common sense there on that particular one. All right, let's take a look at using this guy here. Okay, so here's some things we want to think about as we're looking at the results of this index usage tracking. First think about what kind of things might use an index. Well, obviously, if you have a select statement with a where clause, maybe it uses an index, maybe it doesn't. So we have the obvious things that we know where indexes are used or accessed from. But what about some other things? So if we look at this particular slide here, I'm going to do, in my example, I have the middle bullet there, the gathering statistics. So, everybody pretty much has some sort of batch job that goes out there and gathers statistics on their tables and their indexes, and it usually runs, maybe every night. So once a day in the evening, or once a week on the weekend, or whatever it might be. So we're gathering statistics. But look at the sub-bullet under there. It says that if I generate statistics and it ends up being statistics for an index or more indexes, it considers that to be an index usage or access. So it'll count that as an index being used. Think about that for a second, because that might mislead us a little bit, right? We generate statistics once a day. We're also running these reports to see whether or not our indexes are used, maybe on a daily basis. So we're looking throughout from the morning to the evening, or whatever's a good workload there. And we see that our index was accessed once. And we think, oh, well, I'm not going to drop it. It's used once a day. But maybe that once came from the statistics gathering. All right, so one thing to remember about this, using this particular feature, and this also goes for the 11G and earlier when we use the old way to do it as well. This new feature is meant to help us. It's not meant to replace us. And so when we see something like it's been accessed once or it's been accessed 5 times or whatever, that's just data that's meant for us to make further decisions on what we're going to do with that index. Are we going to keep it? Are we going to drop it? What are we going to do with it? All right, so if you see a 1, that may have came from a query, maybe it came from statistics, maybe it came from somewhere else. So just keep that in mind. So it can be a little bit misleading on some of these things that you see here. We talked about just a little bit ago that inserts, updates, deletes, those types of things will update an index. That doesn't increase the count. Okay, because we're talking about statements that use the index, not statements that, in this case, that would update the index. They're not really using it to gain a performance advantage. When we do inserts, updates, and deletes at the time of the insert, update, or delete, the queries that follow it will, but not actually the insert, update, or delete. So it's not going to count that as one. So statistics gathering does, DML, data manipulation language, inserts, updates, deletes, merge, and such do not. We know that a general rule of thumb is that we have indexes on foreign keys columns, and a lot of times we'll do that because those are one of the columns that we're doing a join on, right? So we're joining on the foreign key column from this table to the primary key column in another table typically. We do that for various performance reasons there, but it's also there for locking reasons too. So that if somebody were going to update the parent key column, if there's no index on the foreign key column, then it will actually generate a full table lock for that type of activity if there's no index there. If we put an index there, then we can do the row by row locking in that case there. So we won't go into that here today, but we have different locking levels based on whether or not there are indexes on foreign keys that reference primary keys there. But in this case here, what I wanted to point out was that's not considered an index access or usage. Okay, so that does not increase the count of its actual usage there. So these are just some things to consider as you're looking at the count and trying to figure out what to do with the index. Keep these things in mind. All right, here's the example I'm doing. This will be very short, and the webinar today is a little bit shorter than some of the previous ones I've had. But I have an employee type table here. This is basically just the EMP table, EMP table that comes from Oracle. And I've got an index called department number underscore IX1. It's on the department number column in this table. So the department number column in this table happens to be a foreign key pointing to the department number primary key in the department table. And many of you are familiar with those two tables there. They're just part of Oracle's regular sample set from way back when. Okay, so keep that in mind, an employee table with an index on department number. All right, I'm going to have a few just real simple examples here to show how you would do it. So there's nothing complex about this. Your queries may be more complex than these, and they certainly will be. But I wanted to show you what's going on here. So here's my employee table. That's what I'm going to use in this particular example. All right, now I've got my application data is in place. I want to go out and track the usage of my indexes that are out there. You really want to change this parameter to all, unless you really have indexes that you're tracking that are going to get a lot of hits, whether they're accurate or not. But if you really want the accurate, index access count, you're going to want to set this to all, and you can set it back to sampled later on if you want. So either at the session level, like this example shows here, or at the system level, you can change the value for this parameter. So remember, by default, it's set to sampled, which may not give you the exact results there, but you could also set it to all, which will. So to set it to all, I'm going to do this alter session set. There's that undocumented parameter, the underscore IUT, and so on. Notice I have the double quotes on there around that. If you haven't seen those before, the reason I have to put those on there is because that parameter name starts with an underscore, starts with a special character. So I'm required to put those double quotes around it there. Otherwise, we wouldn't need that. So I set it to all. I got my application ready. I changed the parameter to all, and then I just start running my code. And every 15 minutes, it's going to get flushed from memory back down, and I can take a look at the new results. So here's what as my application's running and such, I may want to check out what some of these views are displaying, either before the application runs, while it's running, or after it's run, or every 15 minutes, because I know I'm going to get new data then. Here's the $$ index usage info view. Take a look at that, and you'll see an example of running a query against it here in just a moment. I'm just going to go through a few of the columns here. The index stats enabled. That kind of implies that you can disable this feature and disable your index usage tracking, but I have not come up with any information on how to do that, if that's true. Like I said, some people from Oracle have told me that you can't turn it off. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they've told me, and I'll take their word for it, that you can't turn it off. It's kind of like the table monitoring that was in previous versions and also in this one. So they're just thinking now, if it's at the sampled level, the overhead, and they've also, the way they track these is they've programmed it such that they're behind the scenes, they're trying to keep the overhead to a lower resource than it was in previous versions too. So Oracle doesn't seem worried about it, so I'm not going to be worried about it either. So anyway, the index stats enabled, it's a number. If you see it's 0, it says it's disabled, but as far as I know, you can't disable it. If it's set to a 1, that means it's enabled. So, and I'll show you that here in just a second. I'm just going to go through a couple of the more important ones here. The index stats collection type, that's that second one there, right here. If it's set to 0, that means that that parameter we just looked at was set to all. If it's set to 1, that means it's sampled. That's all we're going to see there. So 0 for all, 1 for sampled there. And then the next important one here will be this active element count. All right, and this is a number. So since the last time your data was flushed, this will be a count on how many indexes have been accessed. All right, it's not at the index level, it's not at the object level, this is overall. All right, and these are based on executions. Now, one thing, this isn't the number you really want here. Now you'll see when we look at the other view, there is a much better number for us to look at, because this is just the active count since the last flush. Now, if 10 indexes have been used since the last flush, this number will be a 10. If one of those indexes was used 10 times just by itself, that only counts as a 1. So it's index access. If it's already been accessed, already been counted, it doesn't count it twice. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense or not. So the number, I think, is a little bit misleading to me there, because it looks like, oh, if this index has been used or accessed 20 times since the last flush, I expect the number should be 20. But it's really just 1. Okay, once it's been counted once, it says, okay, this index has been accessed, and it stops counting it from this particular view. All right. The other view is the one we want to see where it's actually being accumulated there. All right. What about some other things on this one? Look down at the bottom there. How about the last flush time? So I know when it's been flushed last. So I was using this the other day. I was querying this one. I could see that looking at the last flush time was, 12 minutes from what the real time is now. So I know another flush is coming in 3 minutes, for example. You could also set up, a batch job that runs based on this type of schedule that this is based upon as well. All right, so some of those are some of the more important ones from that one. Remember that active element count there can be a little bit misleading. All right, here's an example of what the output might look like. So I did a query here of some of those first 3 columns that we talked about in that view there, along with the last flush time. You can see that down here at the bottom, I have a 1. So you remember that's the index stats enabled. That 1 is representing there. That just means a 1, remember, means it's enabled. A 0 would be disabled. One thing that I tried there that was interesting, this says it's 1, and I haven't found anything in 12C release 2 to say how to disable it. So what I tried was to go back to, in 12C release 2, use the old command, alter index whatever, no monitoring usage, to see if that would change anything here, and it didn't. The index was still monitored. It was still counted, even though I did the alter index to turn it off. I guess since, in release 1 it's been deprecated, it kind of got overridden there by this particular feature here. So that didn't seem to make any difference. You see the index stats collection type is that second one, that CT, that's a 0 there. That's your all or sampled, remember there. So 0 is all and 1 is sampled. And then I have my active element count, which at the time that this was run, it was just 0, so no index has been accessed yet, and then the date and time of that. Okay, just a quick review of that. And by the way, these slides are available, they should be available right now out on our website at themisinc.com. If you go to the webinars tab, you should see the slides out there. And then also after we're done today, later on a little bit, either later today or tomorrow or such, this recorded presentation will be out there as well. So if you're taking a lot of notes here, these slides will be available to you. All right, so that's the $$ index usage info view. I don't get as much out of it as I do the DBA index usage one, which we'll look at in a minute. All right, so here's some code, real simple code, but just to demonstrate what's going on here. So remember, I have an index on the department number column in the emp data table. So here I'm doing just a little query looking for department number equal to 20. Here's the results there. My expectation is if I were to run it through explain plan or run it through auto trace or whatever, that he would use that index on department number, and I could run through that just to verify it. All right, so I've run that. So these are just some examples of something I ran in my own environment. Ran that. I also did some gathering table stats, which depending on the options you use with that can also go down at the same time and gather the index stats that are based upon that table there. So got a little bit different code here. So I did a select, I expected to use the index, gathered stats, which I expected to update the stats for the index, and then I ran the exact same query again. And I did the same query again as the first one there to kind of show a point in that, is it going to show that as an access count of 1? Because it's the same query, I accessed the same index as I did before, kind of like with the $$ index usage info, that would not increase the count, or like in the old version, it's just a yes or no. So will the count get incremented here again? Yes or no. So I just did that one again there. So my expectation is that based on what we already know, that running the first query, running the gather stats, running the first query again, that if I look at the DBA index usage view, it's going to show me a count of 3 since this is a new index. It hasn't been used before. And here's the other view that we're looking at here, the DBA index usage view. You can see some of the things it has on here. It has some things like other Oracle index type of views have, like the name of the index, the owner of the index. You have things like, I'll just point out a few here, the total access count. That's the one we want. That's the total number of times the index has been accessed, period. And if I shut down Oracle, it doesn't get reset. So that's the total access count. The only way that's going to get reset is if I drop the index and recreate it. So that's the total access count, period, since the time the index was created, basically. All right, so that's a good column there. Let's see, you have total number of rows returned from your index there. Remember, this is at the index level, at the object level. The other view was at the higher level. This is at the object level, the index level here. And then they have some columns down here that are kind of histogram-like. That show us more specifically some information. So in other words, here we have bucket 0 access count. If that, that tells us the number if the index has not been accessed. So it'll be 0, in other words, if it has not been accessed there. So the bucket 0 is if it has not been accessed at that point. But then we also have the bucket 1. Now this is kind of a good one here. The bucket 1 is going to give us the number there if the index has been accessed one time and only one time, which we can also get that from the total access count up there as well. And then we have these other ones that are more specific. Has the index been accessed 2 through 10 times? How many rows returned for those? Has it been accessed 11 through 100 times, or 101 through 1,000, or more than 1,000 times? So I can also then break it down into those as well. But the main one is that one up here at the top, the total access count. That's what most people take a look at there. So if I do a little query against this guy, I'm selecting the owner, the name of the index, the total access count. Oh, here's a good one too that I did mention on that one, the last used column. So when was the index last used? Now remember, in the 12C release 2, we're counting executions, or at execution time is the index being used, not at parse time. Okay, so last used, and last used is a date type of field. Here I'm just showing the date, but I could also show the time, right, with the two-char or two-char function to convert the time out of that also. So this is actual data here from my particular database. That was that new index I created on the department number. I ran a query checking for it equal to 20. I gathered stats. I checked it for 20 again. And what is the number count? Once it gets flushed down after 15 minutes, what is the count? It's 3 in this case. Just what I expected. Okay. This is the thing that everybody wanted in prior versions and releases of Oracle. When they saw the yes or no, when I went through that in class, for example, or out doing consulting, and we were going through that yes or no, it comes up 100% of the time. So they're like, well, that's great, but it doesn't tell me how many times it was used or accessed. True. This does, and that's a cool thing. You notice here I have another index out here, this employee IX1 index. It's been out there for a while, since October of last year. It has 180 accesses on it. Okay. So this is the view that you really want to take a look at here. And remember, every 15 minutes it gets updated. And I haven't seen anything to say if that can be changed to something other than 15 minutes, if that can be manually flushed down at basically on demand rather than having to wait for 15 minutes. Doesn't appear that so far anyway. Maybe in Oracle Database 18C, right? The next version and release will be 18C, which is really 12C release something else, but 18C will be the number. So, take a look at that there. Like I said, these slides are available out on our website too. I like that a lot there, that I can get the count, because I'm like everybody else. I wanted the count before, but I just got a yes or no. And then when you talk to Oracle about that before, they said, well, that wasn't the intent of the feature before. The intent of the feature before was just to identify, is it used or not how many times is it used at all. All right, so we learned a couple of different things in there. I wanted to bring this one up because this is a release 2 feature, and a lot of times the release 2 features, they get overlooked. We see the release 1 comes out and there's this big list of hundreds and hundreds of different new features in there, and we kind of go through the list and we pick out the ones we think are going to be really effective for us. And then release 2 comes out and we overlooked what's in there because maybe we're already testing in release 1, things like that. And we miss some of the new features that are in release 2. This one and they sneak up on us. This one kind of snuck up on me at some point. It's like, all right, I didn't realize that was there. I looked at the 500 plus new features from release 1, didn't see this one, forgot about it, and here it is. So it's out there. Remember the big differences that it shows us. One is it's keeping a count, especially if we change that parameter to all, of the executions that are accessing or using an index, whereas the previous version only did it at parse time. So parse time versus execution time, actual number versus just yes or no. It's turned on by default at the sampled level. if we're trying to do something specific for a particular index, we'll want that to be all probably. So we might want to change it to all and then back to sampled. There's nothing else we can change it to disable it at this time, as far as I know. So I think this is a pretty good new feature, something to take advantage of if you're trying to keep track of. I've got all the, because what happens is especially for a newer application, we get all these indexes put out there based on various requirements. New ones come in, old ones go away. Some single column indexes are combined into multi-column indexes, and now we've got all these indexes. We're not sure which ones we should keep, which ones we should get rid of. And again, this is going to help us decide those types of things. As far as just a few things to wrap up then, upcoming webinars, our next one's on September 27th. It's on DB2 stuff, so if you know anybody using DB2, let them know, or we have a webinar coming up on user-defined functions, September 27th at 11:30. And if you want some more information on anything that we've talked about today, or just in general, doesn't have to be about today's topic, go out to themisinc.com. You'll see our course schedule, our course listings. You'll see, go up to the webinars tab. All the past webinars are out there. So you can go there, review those. There are recordings and slides that are out there typically. The slides for today should already be out there. The recording will be out there in a day or so. If you want more information about any of the courses that we have, John Cacaval will be more than happy to talk to you about that. You can send him an email at jcac@themisinc.com. And again, follow us on Twitter for any upcoming news that might be coming along as well. Thank you for attending today's webinar. I appreciate it very much. Everybody have a good end of your week. And if you have any questions, remember my email address as well, which is jmullins@themisinc.com. If you have any questions about today's topic or any other topics that might be related to it, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. All right, thank you everybody, and have a good day.